My name is Pastor Donna Rose-Heim, and I get the privilege of being the pastor of Longview Chapel Christian Church. Each week we do a Bible study that focuses on the scriptures that we'll be using in the worship service the following Sunday. If you're not attending online worship somewhere or just looking for something additional, we hope you'll join us. We have our own YouTube channel at Longview Chapel Christian Church, or find us on Facebook. We stream live at 10, but it goes on anytime you want to watch it, and you can wear your pajamas if you want to. So we are doing a series on all of the books in the Bible, and we've made it so far through the Psalms. Today, we're going to be working on Proverbs. So I want you to think for a minute about some of the wise sayings that you have been taught during your life. Maybe your parents taught you these, or maybe they're things you've learned. When we had our Bible study on Tuesday, which you're also welcome to join at 10 or 6:30, we had several come up. Some of these were stitch in time saves 9. If you don't have something good to say, don't say anything at all. Early to bed, early to rise makes someone healthy, wealthy, and wise. If you're sharing this Bible study with a friend, take a minute and share some of yours too. You just push pause. So when you think of wisdom, what do you think of wisdom being? Take a moment and think about that. In many ways, wisdom is about us learning how we can support the order that God has put out there for us to be a part of. How can we be a part of God's creation in a way that we help to build it? Truly wise people know how to do that. When Proverbs has a lot of different sayings about wisdom, you'll see that it starts out talking to my son or my child, depending on which translation you're looking at. Later in Proverbs, it'll actually be talking to my children. So it's about someone teaching the younger generation, but also sharing the knowledge that they have come to over their lives. Many times we think about Proverbs as being written by King Solomon. If you remember, he was very, very wise. He showed that in many different ways and was known in multiple countries for his wisdom. You may remember the story of the two women. Each of them had a baby about the same time. One of them, the baby passed away, and the other one's baby lived, but they were fighting about who the live baby belonged to. And so King Solomon said, "Bring me a sword, and I'll just cut the baby in half, and you can each have half." Well, instantly the mother of the child said, no, let her keep the baby. And King Solomon knew that a real mother would not be able to allow a child to be killed like that. So King Solomon probably did help to author some of these. However, these were written down after the exile, so quite a bit later than what King Solomon lived. But like we've talked before, teachings were first shared around fires and around dinner tables, and while people were walking from place to place. And so the really important things kept being held in the memory of the community. So many of these are attributed to Solomon, but there are others, though, that are attributed to other people as well. In chapter 24, verse 23, you can read how anonymous sages, people who were known for their wisdom, helped to write some of these. In chapter 30, verse 1, it refers to Agur, who helped to write some of these. Chapter 31:1, Lemuel wrote some. And then the scribes of Hezekiah wrote down ones as well. You'll see that in chapter 25, verse 1. Again, feel free to pause at any time and look these verses up for yourself. You'll also see that the Proverbs were written in lots of different backgrounds. Their settings came from different places, which I think is one really good way of saying that these Proverbs are not meant for a few elite people. They're meant for everyone. So some of them have farms, family farms in the background. You'll see that in Proverbs 10, verses 4 and 5. Or the home setting, chapter 13, verse 24. The city, chapter 11, verse 10, or in the royal court, chapter 25, verses 2 through 7. There are other examples too, but I thought one verse was enough to help you see that. So most likely, these posts were written when the people were coming back from the Babylon area or wherever they had been dispersed, because not all of them went to Babylon. They were coming back and restarting their lives again in Israel and Judah. And so the people needed this wisdom to help hold them together. Now, you can break Proverbs down into basically 3 sections. The first is a prologue, and you'll find that in chapter 1, verses 1 through 7. And maybe you remember writing book reports when you were a kid, and you were always supposed to do a summary at the very beginning. And this prologue would have gotten an A because it's very clear. The Proverbs of Solomon, King David's son from Israel. Their purpose is to teach wisdom and discipline, to help one understand wise sayings. They provide insightful instructions, which is righteous, just, and full of integrity. They make the naive mature, the young knowledgeable, and discreet. The wise hear them and grow in wisdom. Those with understanding gain guidance, and they help one understand proverbs and difficult sayings, the words of the wise and their puzzles. Wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. So we can see the title, The Proverbs of Solomon, King David's son, and then we see the objectives. The purpose is to teach wisdom and discipline to help us understand wise sayings. There's some beautiful writing in there to provide insightful instruction, which is righteous and full of integrity. So there's a little bit even greater clarity about what the purpose is for this. And then it talks in the last part about the fear of the Lord. Verse 7, wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. So I want us to talk about that for a minute, the fear of the Lord. Most of us don't fear God in the sense of hiding behind a couch or something because we're afraid of God. But that word fear has a little bit different meaning than terrorize. It has a meaning of respect, but even beyond that, understanding that God is other than us. Sometimes I think we want to say, Jesus, you come be with me. Come be with me. Let's go do my stuff. Instead of saying, Jesus, help me to follow you. And sometimes we want to make God over in our image instead of allowing the image of God to make us over in God's image. So that sense of awe that God is different, other than me, and that I am called to follow God, not the other way around. These are important pieces, I think, of understanding that phrase of the fear of the Lord. The first half then of Proverbs after that is about 10 speeches that help parents to guide their children. It talks about the wise woman. And in this case, wisdom is personified as a female. But there's also another woman, the woman of folly, who demonstrates lack of wisdom. And the child or children are being encouraged to choose wisdom always. Not only as a physical wife, choose wisdom, choose somebody who's wise, but also in life to choose wisdom in all that you say and all that you do. So I think that as we get into the second half, these are more like the Proverbs that we hear more frequently. The ones that say, if you are this, then you are this. The ones that are basically 2 lines. Let's look at one of those in Proverbs 13:25. So that's Proverbs 13, verse 25. And I am going to have to add a light to this subject. The sun went away on me here. Proverbs 13, verse 25. The righteous eat their fill, but the wicked have empty stomachs. So this is a pretty short scripture. It's also a pretty short saying, which most of these are. And in Proverbs 13:25, I think we kind of struggle with this, or at least I do, because if you remember in Job, we agree that bad things do happen to good people, and that doesn't mean that you're not righteous. Jesus taught very clearly that the blind man was not blind because of his sin or because of his parents, but so that God could be glorified. So sometimes we're going to see in the Proverbs that other attitude, that if you're wealthy, you have somehow pleased God more than if you're poor. And I think God knows that we struggle with that. Part of us wants to believe that if we push all the right buttons, then only good things are going to happen to us. But that is not what the overall scriptures tell us. So in this passage where it says the righteous eat their fill, but the wicked have empty stomachs, we all know that there are some really righteous people out there who have been starved. But spiritually, they were full. So if you look at this metaphorically, then it has a little bit different sense. But probably the writers were not thinking as metaphorically as they were thinking physically. It's a struggle that we have, and I think it's good to just name that the scriptures hold within them the varieties of ways that people experience God. And that's a good thing, because none of us get it right all the time. And all of us have certain points that we struggle with more than others. And suffering is definitely one of those things that we struggle with. As we continue to look at some of the different Proverbs, I'd like us to look at one that most of the people agreed was one of their favorites, was Proverbs 16, verse 31. Proverbs 16, verse 31. And if you happen to have gray hair, which I've noticed more of us have that today, thanks to the pandemic than most of us used to. But this says, gray hair is a crown of glory. It is found on the path of righteousness. And we'll find several places in Proverbs that honor people who are aging. And they talk about the wisdom of the aging. We were talking yesterday in Bible study that in many ways our culture has not always honored those who are aging as much as we value youth. Some other cultures, that's not true. So how can we maintain that wisdom of that aging community and honor them? Is there a way that we do that in the church? And I hope so. I hope that the church is one place where that happens more than some others. There is a strong emphasis throughout the Proverbs on justice and on righteousness. Let's look at chapter 21, verse 15. Chapter 21, verse 15. Acting justly is a joy to the righteous, but dreaded by those who do evil. Acting justly is a joy to the righteous, but dreaded by those who do evil. God is a God of justice and a God of righteousness. And when we live in those ways, then we live with God's commandments written on our hearts. And we live in ways that bring honor to God. But if we're finding that we're not living in just or righteous ways, then probably somehow we've erased part of God's commitments to us to be just and to be righteous. Today, we're going to focus primarily on Proverbs 3, but I wanted to give us a little bit of an overview first. So I encourage you to turn in your Bible to Proverbs 3. And if I had to pick just one proverb that says, as kind of brings it all together, I would pick this one. I would probably pick the whole chapter, but we're only going to read verses 1 through 12 today. My son, I don't forget my instruction. Let your heart guard my commands, because they will help you live a long time, and they will provide you with well-being. Don't let loyalty and faithfulness leave you. Bind them on your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. We're going to see that several places in Proverbs where the people are told to bind them on their arms, put them on their forehead, write them on their heart, the tablet of their heart, which, if you remember, the 10 Commandments were written on stone tablets. Unlike those stone tablets, our hearts are living organisms. And as we write God's commandments into our hearts, that means we live into those more fully. Some of you may have seen Orthodox Jews who, when they pray, have a phylactery either on their head or their forehead, usually both. Again, those are reminders that we are to wear the commandments of God, not have them outside of us, but to be a part of our lives. Starting again with verse 4, then you will find favor and approval in the eyes of God and humanity. The next two verses are two that I would really encourage you to memorize if you haven't done that. I don't know about you, but sometimes worry or anxiety or just negative thinking can get going in my head. And it helps to have a few scriptures that I can just immediately feed in to my mind and stop some of that worry. And these are two verses that I would encourage you to memorize. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. Let's continue with verse 7. Don't consider yourself wise. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. Then your body will be healthy and your bones strengthened. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first of all of your crops. Then your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will burst with wine. Don't reject the instruction of the Lord, my son. Don't despair his correction. The Lord loves those who he corrects, just like a father who treats his son with favor. So in verse 6, when it talks about making your paths straight, most of the time now we hop in a car and we go someplace and you just go on the road and you don't worry too much whether the road is straight or crooked or whatever it is. But if we were walking everywhere all the time, wouldn't we care about how straight our path was and how quickly we could get from point A to point B? Well, people who were traveling in those times really did think about those things. So to have a straight path meant to have direct access. It meant to save time and effort. So having a straight path in our wisdom walk with God is important. It saves us time and it helps us to get closer to where God is leading us in less time, with less frustration, and with a whole lot more fruit on the journey. In verse 9, it says to honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first of all of your crops. We've talked before at Longview Chapel about tithing. It's giving the first 10% of our crops or our earnings to God for God's work. And some people will tell you that if you tithe, that you will get back sevenfold or however many fold. And this is one of the verses that's used for that because it says in here that your barns will be filled with plenty if you do this, and your vats will burst with wine. Now, I don't know how many of you have vats at your house. We don't have any of those. But the idea being that you will have plenty in both your barn and in your winery. I do believe in tithing, and I do absolutely believe that it creates a balance. My husband Bill and I, we do tithe, and we did this even when we were struggling with 5 kids to keep all the bills paid and the kids moving forward. But it helped us to stay focused on what came first. And there was always enough, maybe not enough to do everything we wanted to do, but certainly what we needed to do. So us giving was partly about, and still is, about God's commandments being written on our hearts, that it's not about us, but it's about something bigger in the world. So I encourage you to think about your giving and your generosity, that is a part of keeping your heart strong. We were created by a God who gives nonstop, and we were created in God's image. So when we give, it creates a fullness in us that nothing else can do. Giving is a part of us living in to who God has created us to be. The last verses talk about the instruction of the Lord and how the Lord loves the one that the Lord corrects. So let's talk about discipline for just a minute. We all agree that we're having to learn new methods of self-discipline during this pandemic. It's different. I don't even look at my calendar in the same way as I used to. And it has changed how I approach today. Has it changed how you've approached today too? As we're looking at how God disciplines us, I'd like us to think about ways that God finds to guide us, to instruct us, to correct us. Keep in mind that a root of discipline is disciple, one who follows. So discipline is put into place to help us follow better and to correct us when we're off the path. So some of the things our Bible study yesterday came up with that they find helps them to feel God's discipline is the scriptures, reading them, knowing them, studies like this that help us to think maybe beyond what we were thinking. Sometimes songs speak to our heart and let us know that we need to shift to another place. Sometimes other people that are also people of faith, usually, but not always, who have a way of speaking for God at just the right time to help us see that we're getting off the path. And I think all of us need people like that who can speak life into us sometimes when we just get off track of where we're headed to be. I shared that we have a new church administrator who started this week, Shelley Humphrey. She's doing a great job. And we have had a really busy week. It has been putting the newsletter together and a bunch of other deadlines that just had to be met. And our former administrative assistant, who we missed, And we hope Kay's doing well where she is. Got a really good start on the newsletter, but there was still a lot to be done. And I tried to tell Shelley, I said, look, you need to know that when I'm focused on a deadline, I'm not always aware of everything and everybody who's around me. So if you need my attention, you need to just say, hey, I'm over here. I need that help sometimes when I get too focused on getting to a goal and I forget that part of getting there is the process. So think about that for yourself. How do you know when God is disciplining you? When God's instructing you how to be a better follower? Proverbs, there's 31 of them, so you can't actually get through this book. Unlike the Psalms where there was 150, that was a much bigger goal. But I think you can do it this week, and I hope you will, because the Proverbs contain a lot of wisdom that has helped people throughout the ages. And I wish you well this day, and we hope that you'll join us again, either at 10 a.m. or 6:30 p.m. next Tuesday online, or join us this way through the recorded Bible study. Have a great day.